Hi there, me, Joan, mainline sociology. How you doing? All right. So the purpose of what I've introduced so far is to show you that this idea of the dialectic follows us. Deny it all you want to, but this is the way the social sciences look at how society moves through time. I introduced my family because that's something I know from empiricism, something that I saw. I knew that my people, the one branch that I brought out, came to the United States only armed with the idea that they'd had it with being slaves, being brutalized, and this notion of life, my government's not going to kill me, liberty, I can self-govern, and the pursuit of happiness, I can do what makes me tick, and that's going to automatically be a contribution for everyone because people are different. All right, what about this idea of equality? This is another very bastardized phrase that people use. Equal opportunity and equality are not the same thing. All the intent in my view from my understanding of the Constitution was that individuals would be treated equally under the law. As you know, this didn't happen. And my aunt saw that as a betrayal of everything she understood and the generations before her understood about this new contract. So she started talking, hey, maybe a few of us are getting help, but there are thousands of villages thousands of people in hundreds of villages that burned to the ground and no one's talking about them. And she felt that it was her responsibility to do that. Now, in this talk, I'm going to bring up something that's in the news today and people are enchanted by. That's in my view, it's not controversial. It's one of these roll your eyes things. But before I do that, I'm going to introduce this dialectic that Marx turned on its head. Now, he's writing in Germany, and he's responding to Hegel for the most part, because Hegel was kind of questioning that, these people aren't really beasts. They're sort of half human and half monkey. I mean, he sort of said that, and these Greek philosophers sort of implied that their slaves were less than human, but it became a question. Hey, they're just like us. Maybe they have this capability of thought, and they might be suffering a little bit. Maybe we should consider the fact that they had a mind. And I've also said that I believe that that is enlightened thinking. All right. that's the kind of idea that we should take forward with us. All right. And that is the kind of thinking, the kind of dialectical process that settlers saw in the United States. All right. We're talking 1840 to 1915 or so. All right. And they didn't really know that there were these controllers planning the whole future. I don't believe, and I'll give you some evidence for that notion of what I came up with this morning. So this dialectic, this Marxist mode of thinking, remember, Marx makes no effort to hide the ideological character of his work. His beliefs are built into the structure of his theories, and he is humanistic. What does that mean, humanistic? There's a whole branch, but as I said, I'm going to make this really simple. Humanistic means what we see around us. There's no higher force, there's no Geist, there's no anything else. It's just our beliefs are driven by our material needs. Now I can just hear him. I can just hear Karl Marx and his compatriots saying, "We got a problem. Houston, we have a problem." These people are in the United States, are hardworking people. Their individualism and what they're driven by, what makes them tick, as we saw with Adolf Dane, is making a contribution, and it's going really fast and it's going really well. So when I started studying Marx, I had no idea that there was some very advanced physiological information already there. It's not a very far stretch to think that Karl Marx and this guy knew each other. I learned about him much later for a very different reason, but let's look at this guy. In 1848, this man looks pretty serious, earned his doctorate from a university, and he became an intern at an asylum. He worked as a psychiatrist in this asylum, and he served as the director of the mental institution. Gooden made many contributions to the field of neuroanatomy. Well, neuroanatomy is the study of the structure and organization of the nervous system. And neuroanatomy, you mean they knew all about how the brain worked in 1840? He was busy cutting up people, doing all kinds of experiments, about how we perceive information back then. All right, let's go back to Houston. We have a problem with this whole idea of Enlightenment thinking. We got to get a handle on these people, right? Remember, these were farmers, very isolated, but together. They used to call townships villages. So when I use the word village, I am speaking to both the settlers and the native people who were already here. So this idea of the mind, I can hear this Guten and Marx talking about it. How are we going to capture the mind of the American people in particular? Because this was a great threat to the power structure of the time. So Marx says in the preface to the second edition to Das Kapital that my dialectic method is not only different from Hegel's, but is the direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the brain is demiurgus. I could go on a big diatribe about that, and I already did, but let's just say that he was referring to this Geist, this spirit of the human condition that would move us toward peace and prosperity, that we would automatically care about other people, whether we understood their circumstances or not. All right. So in his view, he calls it any power that creates the world, real or imaginary, just to get himself off the hook. The real work and the real world is only the external phenomena of the ideal. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind and translated into a form of thought. With him, the dialectic is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again if you were to discover a rational kernel within the mystical shell. That's Marx's own words in the most basic human form. What he's taking away from you is the idea that you can think at all, the idea that you would care about another person at all. He's putting everything back into the material. If you're going without, you could care less about somebody else going without. So he goes back into history and he says, economic forces have always been responsible for the class structure of society, but each period contains the seeds of its own downfall. And he was referring to, hey, they had a great thing going when they could just kill slaves that didn't obey. This was their dream. They were just brutalizing everything. But the very notion that these philosophers of the past questioned their own means of production stirred the pot, and he was trying to get a hold of that again. So what he's saying is you must study the historical roots as well as the future consequences. So I threw together this diagram about how this works in our mind. And if you saw Adolf Dane, you saw him moving from this enlightened idea, where in his art he saw beautiful landscapes, and he talked to his friend about, oh, this group of people came from a different place than we did, and their belief system might be a little different, but we're all on the same page here. We just want to live in this peace and prosperity, and we will move toward more peace and more abundance. And when the fire raged in Cloquet and everything was turned upside down, he wanted to escape and find out what else. So his thesis became his antithesis. He moved into, well, what else is out there? And his whole journey was him trying to find some synthesis in this. And as you saw, it got very deep for him. All right, so we have to remember that Marx is eliminating the human mind, but he can't do it entirely because, it would fall. Nobody would believe anything he anything he said if he just said, well, you're a beast, which he did. I mean, literally, page whatever it is of the Capitol, he's saying, how do we feed these beasts? They want to eat better food. And they were eating better food here in the United States. There was lots of abundance. They were hard workers. They were sharing each other. But okay, so he doesn't take the fact that, it's getting ahead of this. All right. So he said that humans differ from animals because they're able to link consciousness to action. He calls it creative intelligence. So he goes on about perception through the senses, what we can perceive. And as you'll find out later, his schooling that he created limited that idea. Organization and appropriation. That no matter what, we'd crawl our way into getting what we need, in other words. So remember with Hegel, alienation is a fracture in the consciousness of the individual or the mind of the individual. Hey, I might be doing well. I'm working hard. I'm getting what I need. I'm creating a family. I'm able to discuss ideas that I want to discuss. I'm able to participate in the government process with other people who used reason. But there would remain this fracture or this alienation if we thought someone else was still suffering. Then we're not finished. We are just not finished with our peace and abundance if someone is left suffering. But Marx takes this idea of alienation to an extreme. And honestly, he has four concepts that are central in his theory. Alienation is one of those concepts. I'll introduce the other ones here in a minute. But his idea was, okay, alienation is an estrangement or separation between parts or wholes of the personality. The personality. It's given you a personality. How's he going to break that down? Oh, it's genius how this all worked. So some people are alienated from their labor by the economic production and the systems of class domination. This separation from their work and the products of their work is also being alienated from nature itself. Well, remember, this mode of production that's changing is going from what we can procure from the land, what we can grow. Food grows on trees. Oh, no, it doesn't. Food grows in agricultural fields. That's a very big deal, but an aside. But the actors or the citizens of the United States recognized the fruits of their labor, so to speak. They saw the whole notion. I pulled up the trees. I made this land. I'm planting the land, and I'm sharing the abundance of that. Or in Adolf Dane's case, I'm observing the world and I'm painting it on a picture, and I'm showing you what I'm seeing. In the case of more further back, we go to our Native American peoples where they're living on the abundance of the land itself. Did they plant crops? Did they not plant crops? I don't think they needed to. I think that they gathered what was around them, and that's just for this intents and purposes. Where this goes is a little too deep for this conversation. But Marx foresaw or was speaking to the changes of the economic base to this idea of industry that you saw in the dialectic of Adolf Dane. So alienation for Marx becomes a bigger deal. So an alienated person doesn't place themselves at the center of their existence as the creator of the act. Instead, the acts or roles performed and their consequences become the master of the person. So this loss of emotional attachment to the world outside leaves you with an exaggerated perception of yourself. So it has four components. You're alienated from your productive activity because it belongs to the capitalist. You're alienated from the product because it belongs to the capitalist who sells it to make a profit. You're alienated from your fellow workers. You're isolated from them. in competition with them. And you're also alienated from yourself by your own, alienated from your own human potential. So he predicted so accurately that this industrial society that, remember, these people in between 1840 and 1917 or so didn't foresee coming. The world is a big place. Until Adolf Dane went out across the land and saw these smokestacks and all these dams being built and all these people in New York acting strangely and walking around, and he saw no community there. You can disagree with me, but that's how I saw that. And so to come back to this central notion that Marx is talking about, that we forget about it. We just move past it like it was nothing, and it's so central. So what we have here is an economic base, and we have that creating the actors of the day. Well, if you believe in the old days that and I'm talking about maybe Greek society or Roman society, the economic base and the means of production were all owned by the senators or the master overlords, and the social actors were slaves. Okay? Well, as I said, this is changing. People have been given the right to, we can't go out and kill them outright like we used to make them obedient. They're using their mind, they're separating, and they're creating an abundance. We got to put the kibosh on this. So this economic base of the past created the social actors of the past, which in turn creates the economic base of the present, social actors of the present, future, and so on. And you think, okay, how come you didn't put the arrows on here, Joan? Because I'm not very good at creating pictures like this. But these arrows move back and forth. He gave us the idea that we would be able to look to the actors of the past to determine how they thought, that would affect the economic base of the present and the social actors of the present. We can also look as social actors of the past, slaves, right? Word on the street, there's this country, this new world that has a different kind of contract with the government, that they can participate in the government. They've been told that they have the right to life. We can't kill them outright. Liberty. And they could use their own talents, regardless of status. Regardless of status. Now, if you don't know what a social status is, and I'm sure you do, but I'm just going to go over it to make sure that you understand. In the social sciences, they use the word status to describe different social positions that you have. In the United States, this idea of pursuit of happiness, social statuses that are ascribed, meaning you're born this way. Now, some people have more or less melanin in their skin. Some people's eyes look different. Some people have parts jangling down and not, if you know what I mean. Men, women, Norwegians, Germans, Native Americans, Lakota were different from Cherokee, were different from the Iroquois, and so on. But if you lived on the land they called the New World, every single individual in that land would be treated equally under the law of the land. So, status by ascription, meaning how you're born, how you look. Are you a male or a female? Are you so on? All right. Those status ascriptions were wiped clean from the notion of the American ideals. Instead, you would be rewarded by status by achievement. And that is everything else. Status by achievement means you have to do something to get that status. Being a parent is an achieved status. In order to be called a mother, right? I have to have a child in this new idea of how things go. In order to become a medical doctor, I have to jump through a bunch of hoops and learn whatever I'm told to get that license as a doctor. In order to be a social scientist, same thing, computer scientist, all these things have steps. It's something that you achieve. It's something that you look to. So we don't do these things. We don't achieve statuses without thinking, well, what did my parents do? We look to the past. The notion of the United States of America was we weren't going to have to be exactly what our parents were. That had been the way it was. I think you know what I'm talking about. So the concept of alienation is no longer an external idea. I'm working hard, I'm doing what I can, but if there's another person suffering, we as a people are not doing perfectly. We're not entering into peace. So now the second concept that Marx gives us straight up is that we're entering into a new mode of production. And it's really interesting to me that it's called the superstructure, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But what he does is he says, okay, remember, he made everything material again. You don't have a mind. You're going to be alienated because you're going to have to leave your home. Forget about the family working together as a unit with a natural division of labor. And what I mean by a natural division of labor in the most simple form is people did what they could, what they were good at. Now, with my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather got up in the morning at 5 o'clock and he took his two horses out there and he plowed up the field and he pulled up the roots of the trees and he planted the corn or corn or whatever he was planting at the time, probably alfalfa and so on, to feed his pigs. And great-grandmother would be taking care of the children in the house, reading them stories, telling them about this new ideals that they would be with, preparing food, canning food. It wasn't because I'm a woman, I have to make the food, and the man gets to go out and lollygag all day. That's not how it was. When I entered graduate school in the 1990s, the people in my cohort, as I said, had been 4 years indoctrinated into something that I didn't understand. And there were a lot of conversations about it, and it wraps up into what I'm going to present to you now. Well, in a little bit. So I'm sitting there and we're learning about how this superstructure, the controllers, they create everything. They give you every single idea that you have, because remember, you don't have a mind. So somebody has to tell you what to think. All right, so your values, your ideas come from this superstructure of ideas, okay? Whatever they want you to think. This superstructure creates all the social institutions as well. So once they give you the idea in your head, boom, they have this agency of institutions that are ready to service these ideas and values. And meanwhile, you're working in the factory, right? It's not a cohesive unit with a natural division of labor and a family and a love and a belief in the future that's going to be better for everyone. No, you go and you make the widget and you go home and you get bossed around and you're mad and you come home. It's totally different. And I saw this cartoon. I thought it was very good, because I always said in order to have a job, they should have a formaldehyde jar where you put your brain in there before you enter. And this is kind of the same idea, only a little bit of stepping up. People forget when we step into an institution, it's like stepping into a foreign land where the notions of the ideas of the Constitution don't apply. Before I go into that, I heard my academic friends go, "You're not allowed to call Hegel's notion of the dialectic moving through time enlightenment." This would be a big argument between intellectuals, because what happened is they changed it to idealistic materialism to dialectic materialism. So they already took the idea that they made fun of the idea that we were imbued by a Geist, and I'll get to that, that we were imbued by a Geist, a spirit of community, a spirit of we're not going to stop moving toward peace until everyone on this plane has the same peaceful, abundant world of ideas and moving towards something. We're not going to stop. So they changed it into dialectical idealism. And already you're thinking, well, yeah, and that would be where I would have to concede, because I'm not allowed to say as an academic that the world of ideas may be more important than the material world, because we've had 100 years of this socialization into the idea that into the world that I can have an idea that I want to be a philosopher, or I want to be a musician, or I want to be an artist. That's what drives me. But wait a second, I can't pay the rent then. I can't buy a house then. So I'm going to have to sell my labor power to the capitalist, because that's the only way I can make money. And the pursuit of leisure, what you really like to do, they call it a pursuit of leisure, and our leisure time is cut down, so much by the 1960s that people didn't have time anymore to participate in the government. Like I always said, having a lawn to take care of is a capitalist plot for enslavement, because you'd have to be out there mowing your grass and making your neighborhood, because if if you had weeds in your yard, you would have shame. You would get shame from the other people. They can't take care of their yard. And this is a very small incremental step that we got there, how we got there too. Nonetheless, that's the time. Your time is consumed by going to work, coming home, travel, and then your leisure time where you wanted to be a musician or do your painting or think about peace or God or whatever you like to do. Nope, you got to get out there and hear this horrible noise with the lawnmower, and then you come in and the vacuum cleaner's going and the television's on and it's constant chaos, you just forget about the fact that, oh, I really like to paint or sit or meditate or do yoga or whatever you like to do, right? Cut into that bigger story. But when I saw this, I was trying to find pictures to share, and it got me it really made me angry, because the mocking of this idea of enlightened thinking, where it doesn't matter what's hanging between your legs. It doesn't matter how much melanin in your skin. It doesn't matter if you're Iroquois or German or Norwegian. Everyone is going to be treated equally, and we were going to move toward peace. And how that was hijacked and how it was mocked. And this is the least of it, right? Here you go, brand new idea, fresh from God, and they have it all crossed out. There's no inspiration. You're not allowed to think that. And I wish this was supposed to be funny. Okay? It's not funny. It's not funny at all. It's hijacking the human condition. But they had plenty of time with plenty of mad scientists, in the 1840s, cutting apart people's brains and figuring out how perception worked to do this. They put a lot of work into this. Now let's go back to how I know that there was enlightened thinking. I managed to save some of these antique books. The house was lined with these books. And I only have a few left, but this is one from 1917 that sure everyone read in my house, How to Get What You Want. Now, this isn't what you might think. It sounds like something that was written today. Just opened it to a random page, and here I'll read it. If I am part of reality, if I have existed millions of years and will continue to exist for untold ages to come, if my existence is from everlasting to everlasting, why should I be anxious, alarmed? Why should I be perturbed about temporary happenings, the mere accidents of everyday life? They have no power over me. I am part of a divine entity. My being is beyond the possibility of destruction or change. There is something in me that is absolutely indestructible. And I shall not get into a fury of uneasiness or become discouraged by what I can really control. And that's not all. It goes on and on about this idea. My great level great grandfather, great great grandfather, and great great grandfather and mothers for sure had this idea, and people were writing about it. These artists were writing about this. This book is from 1917. So what they're coming back to, we do not understand the nature of this marvelous faith at all. Those who have it in a remarkable degree simply follow it. This is the pursuit of happiness. I don't know why I can spend all my time in isolation, doing research, being fascinated. I don't know why. It's just what I like to do. Harder to make it easy for you, and I hope I am making it easy for you, and it will all come together at some point. This is one example of hundreds of books that were at the farm, that were talked about, that were discussed, that marveled at the creator's perfect creation, that we are more than what sociology gives us at the top. Finally, 1940, I told you, 1940, they had to say, oh, those people, I think they might have a mind. And they never said we had a mind. They said we were self-reflective, symbol-using agents. And already for 100 some years before that, they already knew the symbology that they were going to put in us. Even with the idea that we could change it. Our material possessions. Let's say, for an example, this is as high level of sociology as you go, that you have a material possession, a fork that you eat with, right? And you can use that fork for your whole life eating food. But let's say you're sitting there eating food with your fork, and an intruder enters the building who looks mean. You will in a flash, you will turn that fork into a weapon. The use of everything is in the way we see it. I could go on a diatribe about myself, but so this idea that we can imagine what the past is, we come to some sort of idea about the past. So you and I are supposed to have this shared idea of what the past is. And I don't want to pretend that I don't know in the field of sociology how the past was depicted and how the past is changed, because it is. It's been changed. And that brings me back to being in graduate school with, I loved all the people. They're good friends of mine still after all these years. But we were talking about, so there were both women and men in there. And I remember sitting down after class, and it took all night long. We stayed in that classroom all night long because these two women were trying to tell me that women don't have the same rights and privileges as men do. The concept then, this was in the 90s, and even then, I was like, where did they get this idea? Because remember, I was influenced by my generations. What I saw in my generations were women having way more choices than men. Now that we're trapped in this capitalist system of materialism, right? How do we maintain the girth of our loins, as they say? Men have way less choice. in reality than women do. Women can become mothers or not. Women can have any job they want to, basically. But they didn't see it that way. I had every job that I wanted. I made money. I made a lot of money. It was easy to make money. It was a lot easier for me to make money in the 70s and 80s than it was for men. I saw that. I compared myself to that. I had more choices in the way I dressed. It was very hard for me to understand where they got these ideas. Let's put it that way. They also had these ideas about people in the past that there was so much domestic violence going on, that men were always beating up women, and women were these helpless victims. Well, where do we get this idea, right? The whole central notion of Marx is to become a perpetual victim of the system. And woo-hoo-hoo, we can't even get started talking about that because there's so many empirical examples of this. And by now, it's so sad for white males in particular that, they just want to kill themselves. These young, brilliant men, they've been told all their lives that the white male privilege exists, that it's their fault. Well, white male and 1% capitalism is not the same thing. But it's always a scapegoat. Goes back to the Bible, but that's okay. So my point is, we don't have a synthesis about what's gone on in the past. It's absurd to think that people in small villages living in families, caring about their communities, would beat each other up. Let's take my great-grandfather for an example. He's working in the field, mother's doing the homestead, doing the education of the children, doing the garden, doing the canning, doing the laundry. What on earth would possess him to hurt that woman? Ask yourself that question. Where would he even get he wasn't frustrated, right? He wasn't frustrated because he went to a factory all day and was beat up, or went to a school all day and was beat up, and came home and said, oh, all you have to do is sit here. That comes later. But to these individuals in school, they were taught that men's brutality was just the way it was. So absurd, and that's an evolving thing too. So do we have a synthesis? Do we have an idea, a shared notion of what the past is? No, we're already fragmented. We're not even off concept 2 of Marx yet, and we're already so far away from the idea of life. Government's not going to kill me. Liberty, I can self-govern. And the pursuit of happiness, I get to do what makes me happy. No, if we're going to make anything out of the world, if we're going to get anything out of the world, then we have to sit through classes, and I worked so hard to get into graduate school, and you don't know anything about the real world. And I'm looking at these people and I'm like, wow, this is work for you. This is my dream, to talk about ideas. And I listened to them and I agreed with them on certain points, but we never did agree on how we were enslaved. It's trite, but it's true that we've always been enslaved. It's my notion that this brief period, call it between 1840 and 1917 or so, for some, was a brief respite from slavery. Now it's hard to say, it's hard to convince people that they are so enslaved that they justify their slavery. And this came from Marx. I think I'll close for now, and I haven't even reached the point that I wanted to make, but to think about what you think of the past, what you think about your present circumstances, and how would you like to move to the future is a broader dialectic. And if you can do that while escaping or letting go of beliefs, that'd be great. The question that I ask young people now often is, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And the answers I get are so wonderful. I'm like, wow, that's such a great idea. Let's do that. How can I help you? And they'll say, well, I'd have to get this license and that license, and there's land zoning and there's rules, and I think I'd have to have some startup money, and I don't know how I could convince people to be with me on this. While their ideas are so fantastic, the society inside them stops. And so I'll say the same thing to you right now. What if that society that's inside you didn't exist? What if there were no bureaucracies and agencies and psychological operations and people telling you who you are? Just what if that happened? But how do we get over the past? And how do we get rid of that fragmented self? People use the words, institution, agency, and even science, and I have to get this this science deal in here. So I thought, well, I'll look online, and here, okay, an agency. So we usually think of the first definition, right? So a business or organization established to provide a particular service, typically one that involves organization, transactions between two other parties. Okay. Labor theory of value comes in here, which I'll get to that. But I like to look at the second definition here. Action or intervention, especially such as to produce a particular effect. Canals carved by the agency of running water. When you understand that there are a lot of words that Marx uses, a lot of words, all right? What I've noticed is that all these words are bringing us back to this idea of water, of ship sailing, of not the law of the land, but the law of the sea. Because this is so clever, people. It's astounding how clever it is. Sinister, but clever. Even the word superstructure. Remember, the superstructure in Marxist theory is the ruling class creates all the ideas, all the beliefs, and creates all the institutions. And there's no higher power, no internal Geist, internal connection to source. No. No. That's gone. What you think in your mind was planted there for a reason. But superstructure, okay, a structure built on top of something else, fine. But the parts of a ship, other than masts or rigging, built above its hull and main deck, the part of a building above its foundations. Now, if you're familiar with admiralty law versus common law or constitutional law, this should be going ding, 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 ding. He told us everything. We just didn't have the context, and that's what I'm trying to bring out to you. And you're going to resist this thought or this agency because if you're any kind of like normal person I've ever met, you think you have a mind of your own. You think that your thoughts, your beliefs, because all beliefs create action. We don't act without having the foundation of a belief for doing so. And sometimes those are hidden, sometimes those are disguised, sometimes those are unknown, but to the controllers, it's deliberate. So deliberate. And we can piece it together as long as we get out of the idea that, okay, I have a lot of brainwashing ideas. Me too. We all do, right? We have a lot of bungled thinking as Donald Duck would say. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've learned through trial and error. And where we are, I think, generally as a people today is if you ask people what they want, they don't know, but they can tell you what they don't want. I remember getting to that place. I knew what I didn't want, but to this day, I don't know what I want. I want peace on earth and goodwill toward men, and I want everyone to be treated equally under the law. But I don't even see the need for a law because I just don't want the government killing me. I want the government leaving me alone because I can take care of my own self, right? I can decide what I need, and I can seek that out with people in my community. We can do that. We can self-govern. We all want to move toward peace. We don't want to come home from a job dead tired and have our spouse screaming at us that we don't have a pool like the Joneses next door. Okay? Or just to come home and check out and enter into computer land. No, want to be together creating something that feels right. So what I find interesting is we use these words. I mean, I'm discovering more about myself and my motivations doing this than probably you will, but I'm hoping that's not true. I can just say that I've always known this about teaching, that teaching is learning. You can't separate those two things. And trust me, I there's so much to learn. I've learned so much every single day. I looked up, well, why is it that sciences end in this OGY? That's kind of it's a thing that people say. I looked up how many sciences there are that end in OGY, and I think there were like 117 different words for science, which comes back to Durkheim. The three thinkers I can't overemphasize, Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, spell out the trap for us perfectly. But so LOGY, dull and heavy in motion or thought, sluggish. So when they're telling me that sociology is a science, what they're really telling me is that it's going to be heavy. It's going to be sluggish, which, yeah, I can say it was. I enjoyed learning social theory, but the field itself is heavy and sluggish and frankly ridiculous. And these days, I mean, I haven't been in there for 20 years, and if you knew, I'm going to tell you how ridiculous, because I act like the Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emil Durkheim are telling you a narrative, and they are, but that's not the way you learn it. That's not the way they try to tell you. It's all very separate, and it's all very fragmented, which never made sense to me, but it was a good way to teach people how to see different perspectives. But it's not a different perspective. It's together taken as the whole theory and the whole plan of the trap of the controllers. So no wonder I never wanted to call myself a sociologist. I didn't really know why. I just don't like name calling. I don't like internalizing definitions of myself because I want to be a moving target, and I am. And it's very hard for my friends sometimes. I'll apologize for that. But because I don't define myself, no one else is allowed to define me either. And now I can see why. But what about Geist? Well, a lot of people in academia talk about Geist, but because they can't define it, they think it's not there. And furthermore, if you can't define it, you can't understand it. And as a general statement, I can say that when people don't understand something, they tend to fear it. And fear is just something we have to get out of our vocabulary. But I'll tell you, there's a reason why so many people seem to have fear. Well, in my mind, and this is just something I came up with, okay? So my academic friends are going to say, dialectical idealism is not enlightened thinking. Dialectical materialism is clearly the way that we navigate through time. I understand that is going to be, or that would be their view. And then your higher level academics will say, you don't know anything about the Enlightenment period. I know about the Enlightenment period. And believe me, I grew up with this, so trust me, I understand that once you're in a very high position to create words, to change the meaning of words, there's some serious fascism going on there. Let's just put it that way. You don't have any ideas. The people up there, and this is my family, I'll bring it back to you, but the people who live in these ivory towers, even if you're known to them, your reading abilities, your talents, all these things, when it comes to talking about enlightenment or what Jesus might have said or what Hegel might have said or what Shakespeare talks about, okay? I personally could, if I could quote Shakespeare plays and understand the meaning of each of those plays, I still would know nothing according to these people. Because remember, they're the ones who are fully invested in this idea that they create the ideas. You don't have an idea. You're a beast. Marx was very clear about that. You're lucky to get this food. Like my sister used to say, Mom makes this feta casserole because whenever, we have Christmas, because she knows I hate feta. She won't even feed me the food that she knows I like, and I'm talking about being an adult. Okay, I ate anything, so it didn't matter to me. But this is the diabolical nature of these higher level elites. So this Geist, so when you're in a science, OGY, you're entering into a dull way of thinking. All right? It's kind of clear OGY to me, LOGY to me. But what about this Geist? The fact that academia and philosophy will do anything to avoid talking about a creator God, or just saying there's a creator God most high. It's self-evident that there is, and that spirit of God is what animates us, everything. That is the life force that we're just learning about now because of things being disclosed, what is hidden about physics. Geist, you think about, okay, sociology, so they're basically telling you if you're a sociologist, you're really slow about what's going on in society. If you're practicing, you're a sociologist. Geist. It's not a far stretch. So you become the spirit of this laziness. Right there, it's a trap. It blew my mind so much. I had to just take a mental break and think about it, or not think about it, and wait for an answer, because it goes along with everything, every single institution. And I can say this with all the authority of the totality of my knowledge. Every institution, polity, religion, there's so many institutions, go on, is created for one reason: to limit God. Everything that we have been taught, that we have been able to see or think we can see because we have an education or something, has just beat us down into the idea that we're just this fractured, alienated self. This Marx, as one philosopher, has done more to kill God, liberty, passion, sensitivity for another that may be hurting. Is you can't even, nobody can tell you more than Marx himself. People aren't evil. The system is evil. No evil people, evil system. That is quoting Marx, quoting Karl Marx outright. He's telling you this is an evil system. And this is after 500 pages of big words that even when you look up each word, you see a double meaning there. He convinces that, it's not convincing, he just states it outright, that the system is way more powerful than you are. Way, you don't even know how much power it has. It creates all the institutions. It creates all your beliefs. It creates every single thought in your mind, to the point that now, after instituting these policies, this perspective, this limiting perspective, for a very short time, people. It's only been, 70 years, 50 years. It's only been, over 100 that he wrote this stuff. And already people are so captured in their minds that they can't even think. They can't think for themselves. So I know that's not you. I know you're thinking for yourself. I know we can get out of it, but all we have to do is see it first, because again, it is never what you know that hurts you. It just doesn't. Forewarned is forearmed, right? You know what's coming at you. It's what you don't know. And whenever I think of forewarned is forearmed, I have this really good friend, and she met her in college, and she went to school for horticulture, and then later to work as a recreational counselor for the developmentally disabled. And that was a great career for her. She just loved it, and she would incorporate her love of horticulture with the taking the field trips and with her developmentally disabled. Well, as we know, the institutions for the developmentally disabled were closed, and so her big choice was they said, oh, we're closing this institution. We're going to dump all these children and adults into homes, and different story how that happened. But we'll still give you a job in a prison. You can be a prison guard. And she's like, well, okay, I need a job. Okay, so she works in this prison. And here she's my friend, and I said, Dee, isn't it kind of scary to work in a prison? And she said, nope. I know exactly what's coming at me in there. I'm much safer in there. I know this guy, he murdered somebody, and she knew all the stories. She knew how they worked. So that's a very interesting idea. And yes, now she's retired. Okay, she got out of there alive. But for 20 years, she spent her life in prison. Literally in a prison. Isn't that interesting?